For the purposes of our show, we play Radiohead, the isolated drums, and then we play Tom York's vocal. Those are all different stems of the song Creep by Radiohead. And the point is, once you've heard them isolated, you just never hear that song the same way again, including us. Like for us, it's a revelation. We will never hear Under Pressure the same way again after 40 years of overhearing it.
I'm Justin J, and this is The Plug. The act of sampling has been a cornerstone of hip-hop since its inception. Producers used segments of older or lesser-known songs to create entirely new compositions. But eventually, copyright laws caught up with the culture and drastically complicated things. But using an actual recorded piece of a song isn't the only way to capture the essence of one track and weave it into something new. Today's guest has an encyclopedic knowledge of music history, theory, and culture. He's mastered the art of connecting the dots between popular songs and the overlooked or obscure influences that inspired them. He's the co-host of the richly informative One Song podcast. Each week, they take a deep dive into a single classic song. By playing rare, isolated vocal and instrumental stems, they give the listeners a chance to rediscover familiar songs, revealing details and nuances often hidden in the full mix. So what is the difference between sampling, interpolation, and outright plagiarism? And why is it now legally risky to integrate the overall vibe and general elements of a Marvin Gaye track into your own song? We'll find out as we sit down for a chat with someone who blends technology with his passion for music history to shed new light on your favorite songs. Today, musician, producer, and the man behind the wildly popular TikTok videos containing his signature catchphrase, Interpolation. Welcome, Luxxury.
I think I'm all ready.
All right,
yes.
Here we go. Luxxury, thanks for sitting down tonight. Good to see you, man.
My pleasure. Good to see you too, Mr. J.
Well, hey, I want to jump right in. One Song podcast. It's quickly becoming one of my favorite new podcasts. It's
oh, thank you.
It's very dense, and you guys put out like an episode a week. That's a really tight schedule. We try and do an episode every other week. What's your production like? I mean, do you and Diallo, do you do a lot of pre-production before you get together? Does he carry his weight? How's your partnership work?
It has definitely turned out to be, yes, the cadence is weekly, and what we bring to it is a fair amount of research, but it's also meant to be just a conversation with sort of like guide points every now and then. We sort of have like a really rough roadmap. We kind of think of it maybe the way Curb Your Enthusiasm has, like you get in the scene with this and you get out with this, but everything in between is spontaneous. So we usually kind of know, a dozen or so things we want to talk about at some point, but the rest is unscripted. It still makes for a fair amount of preparation for sure. And then there's post-production. Luckily, we have the Heartbeat team, and the SiriusXM team. We tape in the garage. So we have SiriusXM engineers, we have a camera person, it's just like it would be impossible without like the dozen people involved, and our producer and our, so it's been really fun to do it that way. Because prior to this, I've just been a DIY music maker and TikToker, and everything else I've done has been pretty much just like, it doesn't happen unless I do it. So It's fun to have collaborators.
It must feel kind of magical how you guys, I'm sure some of the tracks that you intend to talk about must be queued up, but sometimes stuff just comes up in conversation, and then in post, it's just magically played. That must feel kind of magic.
Well, that is true. But for the most part, especially as we've gone along, we've learned that it's just, if it takes a millisecond more, when you're talking, we get excited and you're like, oh, I want to play something for you. There is like what probably is a 3-second gap between you thinking of it and then typing it in and playing it. But it feels like forever. But that gets tightened up after the fact, so the listener doesn't experience it. But we have learned to do it in the room more often than not. One, so we can experience the excitement of like, oh yeah, it sounds like that. You're right. I'm hearing it now. It's not just in theory from my memory. But also it just saves 10 minutes later for somebody else, and a back and forth and, revisiting mixes. So just the 3 seconds there saves hours later across multiple songs.
Interesting. So, I'm not a musician myself, but I've always been really fascinated by the recording process. And even when I was a kid, at one point, I thought that I really wanted to be a studio engineer. And that never happened. But, once I became a photographer, I was always really intrigued to get to shoot artists in a recording studio, because I just found it so fascinating to get to listen to isolated vocal tracks and isolated instrumental tracks. And, you talk a lot about the term stems in your podcast. And I'm just wondering, it wasn't until a couple years ago that I'd even heard that term. Like, was there a great rebranding that happened of the term? Or, is it the same as a track? Like, explain to me what exactly a stem is.
Right. So on the show, we play full songs, the way you'd hear them on the radio. But the show is called One Song, and that focus song of every episode, we go a little deeper and we break it down, as you were mentioning, into its component layered parts. The drums by themselves, the bass line, the keyboards, the guitar parts, the vocals, the backing vocals. And part of the fun of it, especially since what we are trafficking in is mostly pretty big, well-known, culturally iconic David Bowie and Queen Under Pressure, Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit, Beyonce Break My Soul. Like, these are big songs. Rihanna Umbrella, right? We did Bob Marley. So one of the things about the show that we have experience ourselves as we listen to the component parts, to just Stevie playing the drums on Superstition. It's like, we've all heard Superstition a jillion times. It's a 50-year-old song. And maybe we're a little tired of it, or Under Pressure, right? And you might get a little tired of it, but there's something really magical about hearing just these component layers, the stems. And that's one way you can call them the multitracks, the stems, the isolated parts. I don't know the history of the terminology becoming common parlance or not, but that's what it means. And they're somewhat interchangeable.
Okay.
There are very technical people out there who may have some rigidity in the way they prefer to hear it expressed. But I personally am not a language gatekeeper that way. Stems, in other words, sometimes stems means a section of the song isolated. Sometimes it's the whole thing. For the purposes of our show, we play Radiohead, the isolated drums, and then we play Tom York's vocal. Those are all different stems of the song Creep by Radiohead. And the point is, once you've heard them isolated, you just never hear that song the same way again, including us. Like, for us, it's a revelation. We will never hear Under Pressure the same way again after 40 years of overhearing it, possibly.
So I'm reading right now the Chris Blackwell biography. And for the listeners...
Yeah, I read that too.
Great. It's fantastic. It's so dense. It's so interesting. For the listeners who may not know who he is, he founded Island Records, and, he signed Bob Marley and U2. It's a really instrumental figure in the music business. But, one of the ways that he kind of came up originally is he was working in Jamaica in the jukebox industry. And so he would travel all around Jamaica and source and fill...
Swap out the records.
Out the records. So he would be in these little bars in these little towns in the hills. And so he had a really good finger on the pulse of, what was popping and the new artists that were happening. And then so when he went to the UK, he had this incredible record collection, and he would DJ with these songs that nobody else had. And sometimes he would, peel the labels off so other people wouldn't know what it was. And so, that said, I'm going to ask you this, and forgive me if this is a direct question, but where the hell do you get your stems from? I mean, is that akin to asking a DJ where he gets his rare records? I mean, is there a lot of secrecy surrounding that?
We were just... there's I just mentioned the word gatekeeping and secrecy. Sure. Just going back to what you said about Chris Blackwell, that's the history of Jamaican music, has the sound system culture. And it goes back even further and deeper into the 50s when the biggest sound systems were Duke Reed and Cox and Dodd and Tom the Great Sebastian, all these legendary, iconic, and they were giant outdoor DJ-centric music experiences where people would dance to records, which was relatively uncommon in this type of... It's very unique to Jamaica, I should say, in the 50s. That was Jamaican music. There were bands, but bandness was less important. And to your point, the sound clash, which is a word you still hear to this day, which is a battle between different sound systems to hold the attention and get the audiences to come back every week. Part of that was that you would have a record nobody else had. So you would scratch off the label, and then there would be what's the word? Not detectives, but like spies. The other Duke Reed would send his spies over to Cox and Dodds, and they'd try to decipher what the music was. So like that's a really fun part of Jamaican culture. I guess I'm only saying that because like Chris Blackwell as a historical figure is a bit problematic, not just structurally, white dude, rich white British man in Jamaica, profiting off of the black people who make the music, like right there on paper. But and he's obviously done some wonderful things, no shade on Chris Blackwell. But there's also a lot of behind the scenes questions that I like. He has claimed ownership, for example, of some Bob Marley songs, which is of questionable, that are disputed, let's just say. So I just want to make sure that we set the record straight, that he did not invent the idea of scratching off, not that you implied that he did, but that is a longstanding Jamaican sound system tradition. And I'm a huge Jamaican dub and reggae fan, especially of that era of the 60s ska into rocksteady into roots reggae and dub, kind of that key late 60s into 81, 82, when it starts to morph into the dance hall. And I am less into that. But that was just a fun way for me to talk about my favorite kind of music and avoid your question.
So I guess I saw my takeaway is that question asked that direct. That's like asking your drug dealer, like who his plug is. Is that?
I'm just being silly. It's turned into like being a thing where it's the one question I don't answer in the comments, just because it's funny to be consistent. There wasn't any reason why I didn't answer the question directly once upon a time, but I've just consistently decided that is my running gag.
Got it.
To not answer the question of where do I get the stems?
Your ability to source those stems and bring that to the table. I mean, that's kind of like that's one of the unique things that you bring to the podcast, so I get it.
I think that may be true, but I have to say that is also something that increasingly we're just like getting away from, just because, first of all, it will become easier for people to AI stem things. Well, it already is.
I wanted to ask you about that. I watched the Beatles Get Back, when that came out.
Yeah.
Loved it, burned through it. And essentially, I've read a lot about Peter Jackson's technology that he helped develop, the machine learning, so you can kind of isolate instruments and vocal tracks. And then there was a new Beatles song that came out last year. They took, for those who aren't familiar, there was a cassette tape that Lennon had recorded, and they were able to use this machine learning software to isolate his vocal track so that you could actually remix it properly with the remaining other Beatles and make a real song.
And this technology has in some way existed. It's not dissimilar to what we've been able to do for years with, you're familiar with Auto-Tune, and there's a version called Melodyne, which is like a more advanced, sophisticated, where you can, as of a decade ago even, they were able to start separating if you have a vocal stack. It could isolate for you the component, different melodies that comprise the harmony of a vocal stack or a guitar part, even the individual strings. So this is beyond my technical capacity, other than to say, part of it is separating sound by frequency and some other more complicated algorithmic stuff. And the other part is cleaning it up so that the noise is reduced and it sounds just clean. So that stuff has been happening in the Peter Jackson stuff, the Beatles song, I think Now and Then, that came out last year. So AI and algorithmic technology has been for a while able to isolate stems. It'll never be the same.
I was gonna say, like, how close, like currently, in its current state, how close? I mean, you don't have to tell me literally where you got them, but I assume they're pulled from the masters at some point.
Well, no. So here's the thing. There are many different sources. Sometimes they are from remixes. So an artist puts out a song, a very famous one, both Nine Inch Nails and Peter Gabriel have done public, here are the stems to these songs. And anyone can, download
like
them
open source, basically.
And remix it. Or it's essentially like open sourcing the song. So there are some songs for which that's been the case, and some people just held on to them and collect them and trade them. And there are other songs that came about because of games like Guitar Hero, some of those games where you're literally, playing a guitar and with pellets as those games that there were a couple of them about a decade ago and change. There was a Beatles one. I forget the name of the competing one, but Guitar Hero was the franchise, and there was a second one.
Was Rockstar or something?
Rock Band, I think. Yeah. So a bunch came from that. And then some engineer in the bowels of Capitol Records was dubbing some old masters and kept a copy for himself and started to trade it with friends. And so there's like a kind of underground community, a secret underground layer.
Got it. And how close in quality is the Peter Jackson technology versus something pulled straight from the masters, like currently with today's
Well, it's
technology?
all over the place. The thing is, you have to remember that, first of all, stems, it is a pretty broad concept. You can, right now, for example, I have a single coming out in 2 weeks. So for my next single, if I wanted somebody to remix it, I could give them stems in many different ways. One way is, if I don't remember how many tracks there literally are, let's just say there's 24 tracks, 24 different isolated things I did separately. The kick drum, maybe there's a sampled beat that I just ended up using a hi-hat from, my bass line, me singing this, that. I could theoretically give you 20 stems. If I did that, I could theoretically isolate them and bounce them before. This is going to be technical, but just to answer your question about, like, there is a variety of ways you can stem something with the effects that were on the master, not part of it. In other words, the effects that when you summarize all the stems, when you bounce it down to a 2-track song to listen to it, it has to be 2 tracks. It started as 20, ends up as 2. In that process, there's filmic equivalents. Like, maybe I've always been trying to think of a good analogy. Maybe if it were a movie, you'd shoot a bunch of scenes over time in different places, and then there's that final process where sort of color correction comes into the picture
grading,
to even it all up, to make it all look somewhat in the same world, because they might have been shot by a different camera crew, all kinds of different factors. So that's kind of this final stage is called mastering for music. You can isolate and throw out the drums without that final stage. You can do it with that final stage. You can do it where all the beats are together and all the vocals are together. You can do it where all the beats are isolated. These will all sound a little different.
Wow.
Right? So on any given song, for the Queen Under Pressure, for example, that's one where I happen to have lots of, not only are they isolated to the max, but I have all kinds of like outtakes and stuff that they didn't use in the original. So that was like a really fun, extra solid bonus one. By contrast, my Radiohead Creep, it was plenty for the show and plenty to be excited by, but I literally had 4 stems: the drums, the bass, the guitar, maybe there were 2 guitars, and the vocal.
Straight through from beginning to end, pretty much.
Beginning to end, I haven't gone back, stacked them all up and compared it to the song on Spotify to hear. It would probably be different, though. There would be slight variations in the volume balance, for example. So it's going to depend. I don't think the AI stems will ever sound as good as real stems, but they're good enough.
Good enough.
And here's breaking news for your show. I won't disclose which ones, but we've done definitely 1 and maybe 2 episodes where, kind of as an experiment to see, hey, can we get away with it? Like, I don't have these stems, but I want to do this song. Let me grab one of these AI programs and stem it out, see what we can do. And no one's ever said anything in the comments, so I think we got away with it.
Breaking news.
Breaking news. Exclusive.
Well,
I don't have the actual air horn. That was my air horn.
Did you, switching gears for a second, did you happen to see the Greatest Night in Pop documentary about the making of We Are the World?
Oh, that was so fun.
It was so fun. It was like endlessly entertaining just to see, speaking of isolated stems, like getting to see in real time these artists singing these lines that we all know so well and having multiple takes of it.
I never get tired of it. Never.
I mean,
never.
The Cyndi Lauper scene just gave me chills. I mean, she just crushed that.
When her jewelry is making these noise and they all figure it out finally. I love that. It's a great moment.
I mean, but more interesting than that, I felt like it was great insight into the brilliance of Quincy Jones, because, not only did he have to try and pre-produce which which people's voices would work best with which phrases and lines and then sequence them. But he had to manage the egos of those 40 people in the room. And I think that was like such a huge part. And he had to kind of exert dominance in a way because he knew that everybody wanted to put their 2 cents worth in, but once that started,
and the clock was ticking, he had a limited amount of time to do it. And there's all these cameras and lights, and it's hot, and people are hungry, and they want pizza, and it's remarkable. He is a god.
I love it. And then I thought it was so strange how people. So then the one person who did kind of start to put his 2 cents worth in was Stevie Wonder, when he got this great idea, he wanted to put Swahili into the chorus or something. And I think Quincy finally kind of shut him down. But you know,
am I misremembering? Did he do that classic thing that you probably find again in film and photo, where it's like, yeah, let's try that, and then we'll like you just like kind of indulge it because so often it takes more effort and time, and it's you sort of get if you say no, then that makes the person feel bad. Like if you just say yes. Sometimes everyone can kind of hear for themselves, we tried it, it didn't quite work. And that, in my memory, that's what happens for the Swahili thing, but I don't, I may be misremembering.
No, I think you can kind of get the sense that everyone, well, it was funny because people were very like, I guess maybe because it was Stevie Wonder, like very deferential. I think if Huey Lewis tried to pull that off, it might not have had the same reaction. You know,
Although he comes off as a hero,
he really does. I actually was trying to get him for the podcast. I was like, wow, this guy's really cool. Like,
I was very impressed by him too.
But anyway, the point is, you know, this season on the podcast, for one of the themes that keeps coming up, we've had a lot of artists on. And we're talking about the role of the music producer, and we had on Dante Ross, who worked a lot with De La Soul as an A&R person, and he's produced a lot of hip hop and Brand Nubian. We also had on Nikolai from The Strokes, and he talked a lot about his experience working with Rick Rubin on the last Strokes album. And, you know, my takeaway is that the role of the producer is so specific to the situation and to the band itself. And, you know, I'm wondering as a music producer, like what your biggest skill set is. I mean, because it seems like on one hand, you almost have to be an engineer on some level of the spectrum, and then on the other, almost like a therapist to a degree. Like, what's your experience been as a music producer?
Well, producer is a word that in music is a very wide spectrum of meaning. It can mean the beat, like Kanye, the producer, is making the beats. He is selecting the samples. He is, at least in the early days, he's there chopping them up. You know, in hip hop in general, like DJ Premier, like that word in hip hop and electronic and dance music is more of a getting your hands dirty. It is using samples and synths and DAWs, computers and software programs as kind of as instruments themselves, and blurring that line and blurring the line of production and instrument playing and mixing. It's all kind of a piece. It's all happening at the same time. It's very different from, you know, the kind of opposite end of the spectrum might be Rick Rubin taking on, I don't know, Weezer or the Dixie Chicks back in the day, and he sits in a chair across the room very far from the equipment and listens to the demos that Rivers Cuomo has been working on or something like that. This is like some kind of apocryphal story. I'm sure it happened, but like it popped in my head as being a perfect example of the opposite, where he's just, it's not any small thing, but listening to the material and weighing in with his very important and storied ears and, you know, emotional opinion about the material. Is it worth recording this? So like we're not even talking about like the sonics of something or
how to mic something. I mean,
I think Rick Rubin stands at the opposite extreme as an example of somebody who, as a producer, is pure ears, but also emotion. I think he's very much in touch with what you were alluding to, like the Quincy Jones school of production. And Quincy Jones, by the way, is somewhere in that same range too. Quincy is an arranger himself. I was just looking this up the other day. He doesn't have a lot of songwriting credits, but he also doesn't have zero songwriting credits. I think that I believe he does have experience as a performer, certainly, but for the most part, he's been famous as an arranger, as a person who decides who the people are who should do this and in what order should the parts go. And a lot of it is this like more big picture kind of producer, more like movie producer, frankly, right? So I am a producer, more like I am touching the keyboard. I am in there in Ableton making choices about this snare, this snare, and I'm playing instruments as well, bass and guitar and keyboards and singing. And my producing is the all-in-one to make the music come out the other side. DIY. I mean, to me, it's fun because it's sort of like a punk rock ethos, the DIY ethos, applying it to, to not punk rock music, which I grew up on. I've always loved the idea that I'm kind of bringing a punk ethos into electronic music. By the way, I'm not inventing this. That's been there for 40 plus years. New Order was bringing a punk ethos right into Blue Monday. That's kind of a punk rock song that happens to have drum machines
punk
and
rock dance
and sequencers.
Song.
Yeah.
An excellent episode, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Well, one of the themes that consistently comes up in your podcast is the use of sampling. And for those who may not be familiar with your work outside of the podcast, you also have a TikTok presence where you break down the kind of unsuspected or unknown similarities between different songs called Interpolation. How do you say that? Oh,
you want me to say it? Interpolation.
There you go. That's what
my famous whisper.
Interpolation.
There it is. That's such a funny thing. It's funny to walk around in the world and have a catchphrase. Like literally strangers. I was at Tower Records a little while back, like maybe a year ago, and I walked up to the front. Like as I was walking to the counter, somebody who had just paid was walking the other way and passed me and said, "I love your videos." And when I got to the front, the person who was going to take my money said, "Are there any interpolations on this?" So that was a pretty funny 1-2 punch. But yes, I talk about the phenomenon of musical borrowing. I'm actually working on a book which is due in 4 months and 21 days.
Oh, amazing. Well, I want to get a is it primer or primer? Get a primer?
That's a great question. I would say primer, but then I would wonder.
I have looked it up, and I am pretty sure that
primer sounds weird too.
It does. I'm pretty sure that primer is correct. However, you sound like somebody who went to Amsterdam once and talks about how much they love Vincent van Gogh. You're like, just drop it.
Oh God, no. I would hope that I don't sound like that person. I would hope I would sound like the person who, as you just did, would mention that is a phenomenon, but I would distance myself from the phenomenon.
Okay, well, give us a quick lesson on the differences between interpolation, a sample, a cover, and a reference. And I have some examples here. I want you to tell me if I got this right. So let's start with interpolation.
So interpolation, as hip-hop fans who read the liner notes can tell you, a perfect example, of course, being 1979's Rapper's Delight by Sugar Hill Gang. That is an interpolation. The music in that song, and by the way, it's funny, just today our Questlove episode dropped, and he walks us through the history of how beats start, beat making basically in hip-hop. So the very concise version of that is the earliest hip-hop beats were replayed hits of the day. So Chic's Good Times was a huge hit on the radio. Sylvia Robinson says, hey, let's use that music underneath our 8 minutes of dudes rapping about, food and hotels and Holiday Inns. So, so when you listen to Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight, you'll hear what sounds like Good Times by Chic, but it's being replayed. So that's a replay. That is an example of an interpolation. It's another recording. It's music that you've heard before, but it's not sampled. It's not Chic's Good Times and they rapped on top of the record. They had a band replay it, reperform it. So that's a good example of interpolation. It just means replay, but sometimes it means just a little fraction of a melody and not the entire thing. A good example of that being, I don't know, there's a Dua Lipa song that popped in my head. Or actually a good one that I like to use is the Portugal the Man, but I'm spacing on the title. So the original melody comes from Please Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes.
Interesting.
And that's, oh, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Hey, yeah. So Portugal the Man used that, ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. It's the same melody, but with different lyrics. And it's just a piece of it. And then he goes on to continue with different melodies, the original ones to the song. But because they used a fraction of Mr. Postman, they paid and added to the publishing credits, meaning they will forever pay a portion of royalties on that song, not just a one-time thing, to the co-writers of that Marvelettes, 1961 Marvelettes song.
And so was that the issue with the Robin Thicke, Pharrell, Blurred Lines with Marvin Gaye? That was an unlicensed interpolation? That's something completely different?
So I mean, it's funny just because like literally this week I'm working on that chapter of the book. So it's very like floating around my head. And part of the challenge is trying to summarize why that case was different, because it does revolve around a very loose interpretation of legal principles that were already fairly loosely defined in some cases. Long story short, Blurred Lines is not the same song as Got to Give It Up by Marvin Gaye from 1977. So that song, I don't know if you're going to cut to it now, but I used to go out to parties.
Not bad, not bad.
That song is different from the Blurred Lines melody. It's different from the chord changes. It's different. Every element, we were talking about stems before, the drums, the bass, the keyboards, the vocals, every single layer is different. However, that court case is important from 2000. It began in 2013. It took 5 years. But the finding, what happened was a musicologist came in and said, hey, I realize that nothing about this song is the same as that song, but we want to win this case. She didn't say this out loud. But their legal strategy was, let's point to all of the things that are kind of the same, and we're going to call it something. They said there's 8 things that are kind of similar. And then there's these 4 other things that are a little less kind of similar. But now we have the number 12, so we can impress this jury. And they called it a constellation of similarities. Wow. So they made up this concept.
I would say that's not a legal concept.
It's not a legal concept. They made it up. And they said, this song it's not a sample. It's not a cover. It's not an interpolation. But it's got this dozen or so. Look at this list of things. And some of the things would be like, let me think of an example. Both songs have percussion, which sounds like somebody hitting a Coke bottle with a stick. Kind of like that, wow. Right? That's one. And then they went down the list.
That's a weak one. They had 8, and that
They're
was
all
one
weak.
of them. Yeah.
Every single one of them are weak. The bass line is played on a synth, and it's got syncopation in these areas, and blah blah blah. It's a descending pattern. It was a lot of literally musicological like hogwash.
Wow.
Like, I'm going to wave my hand, jury, and you're going to be distracted by how legitimate and authoritative what I'm saying sounds.
Okay, so that's definitely not interpolation according to your definition.
Yeah, I am in the majority of musicologists, musicians, and people with ears who looked at that decision. And by the way, when it happened in 2018, I was in LA co-writing, which means working with other musicians and writing songs either for them or like to pitch to the Justin Biebers of the world, the pop song community of co-writers. And it definitely put a chill on what prior to that had been a conversation that began every co-writing session, which was, hey, what are you listening to?
Yeah,
Hey, what are you vibing to? What music is turning you on? What should we do today? I'm vibing to this, Michael Jackson song. Let's do something in that kind of tempo. Boom, ska, boom, ska. But instead of doing, we're not going to do because that's a little too close for comfort. That would be interpolation. Yeah. Why don't we do something like like just anything else, like kind of go sideways from the idea.
So you kind of have like the sonic atmospherics of a song.
It's just, let's take a piece of it that isn't like legally, but also just because creatively, who would want to redo it in the same way? Yeah. There's something I'm inspired by this tempo. I'm inspired by this snare sound. Let's have that be what drives us today. And then it doesn't take many steps in the creative process before that first thing you started with becomes a completely new song. But in the wake of this case and that verdict in 2018, it made musicians far more careful, especially the big ones for whom there was more attention being paid, legal attention and, caution because of potential lawsuits that could come from anything too close for comfort. So people started to be more cautious, more circumspect about what they would cop to being inspired by, because suddenly being inspired was dangerous. Like, to say that you were inspired by something could be taken as proof that you ripped it off, according to this new legal definition of ripping something off.
Here's another example. So we're talking about the Strokes. So on their last album, the Bad Decisions track has a writing credit for Billy Idol for Dancing with Myself.
There's another one. And there's another song, which is
there's
like
Richard Butler has a song credit on that too.
Right.
Is that interpolation?
Those are both great examples of interpolations. I'd love to hear, I haven't heard the episode, I don't know if Mr. Freture talks about it, but I'd love to hear, they seem, look, I actually did a video about them and those and a dozen more, because that is a big strokesy thing to do, is to vibe on something else. I did find, for example, some quotes where Julian cops very openly to having 1251 on Room on Fire is from Sonic Youth's Bull in the Heather. And if you ever listen to them back to back, you're like, oh yeah. And he admits to it openly. I actually don't think I've checked the publishing credits on that, but clearly he had the confidence to say that out loud in interviews. Perhaps that translated to, I don't know, agreements being made behind closed doors, agreements. Maybe there's a shared lawyer who's like, hey, we both have these, my client's you and my client's also Kim Gordon. Yeah. So everything's, who knows how those things can go down. They can go down very many ways. But you're right. In those two cases on the more recent albums, those interpolations were credited and, rightfully so, I think, like those pretty similar. Those are two major similarities.
And then what about, so this is something, so that like Something Like a Phenomenon, the LL Cool J song, it's a sample from White Lines, but it's also the title and the hook. So what, is that a reference? What is that?
That's an interpolation. So great question. I mean, let's break it down together. That the original, the Liquid song, did you, I have a video about this. I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I haven't.
Okay. So yeah, the Liquid song Cavern has that do-doon, do-doon, do-doon. It's a little bit different, but it's the same. And there's no chance,
unmistakable.
I mean, literally because of the legal proceedings that transpired, Sylvia Robinson went to the ripoff store again and from Sugar Hill Records. And for that Melly Mel track, White Lines, they dug into that hit, the Liquid hit. And it became a court case. It ended up actually with the Liquid's label went bankrupt. I mean, it was ruinous for them. But it was the same track, the same bass line, the same, the beats roughly the same, the tempo. There's no chance that it was not interpolated, that it was not similar to the Rapper's Delight situation where they replayed a hook, like a club hit. Yeah. And then White Lines, if you go and listen to Cavern, I actually don't think I know what the lyric is. It might be gibberish, but he goes, ba, ba, like it's the same rhythmic. That, like, so a lot of what was heard in the original finds its way with some slight alterations as interpolations, not just in the bass line, not just in the beat, but also in the vocal delivery. And then something like a phenomenon in the original, it's like I think it's in and out of phenomena or something like that. So all of it goes back to Liquid, including the LL Cool J.
Interesting.
Where he has the title of the song, I think is, right? Something like a phenomenon, or is that just the line?
I think it's the title. I think
the title is Phenomenon.
Okay, Phenomenon.
So Phenomenon, yeah. So it's two layers that you can trace back the LL Cool J to the White Lines, perhaps not even aware that came from the Liquid. I'm not really sure. I mean, LL Cool J's ahead, so he would have been there in the day. But maybe not in 83.
So it's like
he might have been like
the interpolation version of a triple entendre, almost. Like
yeah. No, I love that. See, now that to me is wonderful. I just had a long conversation with a musicology friend today who actually has a PhD in musicology, and she and I were talking about this phenomenon, something like a phenomenon reference. That was a reference.
Good.
Not an interpolation, not a sample. It's a larger topic we can get into, but there is a wonderful book that she recommended to me, which is called, I think, The Museum of, I'll track it down and I'll send it to you later, but research and a book that was done about this moment in time that was brief throughout the history of music up until a certain point. It was understood the shared nature of how music is made, the shared phenomenon of melodies finding their way into other songs, like back in Gregorian chant. Like this is how music was made for centuries. And you find it all over the place. Like in Mozart, he'll be using melodies that came from blah, 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 blah. So then there comes a point in history where this idea of an artist being isolated and a genius, like a Beethoven or a Mozart, sort of springs up as this Western idealized vision for originality, isolated from other musics, from other art forms, as being idealized.
Like a creative vacuum is what defines genius.
which is non-existent. There is no creative vacuum. Like everything comes from something else. It's just a matter of how much do you want to maybe admit it or recognize it or acknowledge it or feed into it. Because by contrast, and I'll finish this thought, I'll land it with this idea. There's a book that I love by Larissa Kingston Mann about Jamaica and Jamaican. It's about Jamaican music and colonization. It's wonderful. It's this music book, but it brings in all these political layers. It's so well done. I learned so much from it. But it starts with this anecdote, and I'll quickly tell you the anecdote. It takes place, I think, in the 2000s, and there's this contest. It's like a Jamaican version of a, Simon Cowell type competition, music competition, right? So the competitors get up there and it's like a song contest. So one of the judges is alluding to why he's choosing this song as better than that song. And I'm paraphrasing from memory from reading this book, but essentially what he says is he didn't like the first one because it was, quote, too original, whereas the second one was using a rhythm from a previous well-known and loved track and was building on it. And that was he liked that one better because to him, that was more, quote unquote, creative, right? And that just blew my mind because in Jamaica, creativity is celebrated when it's referential, when it plays into a shared reference point that everyone knows that song. It's part of our shared history. It's the tapestry of music. It's communicating with you. It's kind of like the rap beef that we're experiencing in this last week. How wonderful is it that this song refers to this song, refers to that's layered, a really fun, and we all as a culture get to participate in it and learn from it. And I love it.
It's funny you brought that up because I wanted one of my favorite episodes of one song is the Sister Nancy episode. And I think maybe you talked about that same book a little bit, but just even it has a deep dive into, the culture of Jamaican music and the music business and just their kind of approach and philosophy of ownership of music is almost completely flipped and opposite of what we are here in the States.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was one of my favorite ones too. Jamaica is such a fascinating example because it literally is, because it's an island and because there was no copyright law until the early 90s, you have this kind of perfect experiment of what would happen if music was just shared and built upon itself constantly. And what if we were taking a song and reusing the backing track, right? The rhythm, and building a new song on top of that. And then there are albums that came out where the same, like the Stalag 17 rhythm, which is the Sister Nancy Bomb Bomb episode, that's the rhythm. So Sister Nancy's Bomb Bomb is Sister Nancy rapping over an existing song called Stalag 17, which had been out for 8 or 9 years at the time. That is Jamaican culture celebrates that. It doesn't say, oh my God, you're so uncreative. Come up with something original, which, by the way, my comments are every time we do a rap or hip hop episode, it shocks me that people still have this mentality this many decades into the existence of sampling and this many decades into the existence of, but that's for another day. But in Jamaica, you have this perfect storm of creative reuse that is celebrated and becomes this ongoing conversation. And you can sort of trace the history of the island and its people in a way through its music, where a song connects to a previous song, etc.
I have one more question for you. I want to get your take on so Taylor Swift recently, she re-recorded a bunch of her own music almost identically and re-released it in order to avoid paying royalties to her music label. Is that a cover? Is that interpolation? And more importantly, is that a brilliant loophole that she invented? Why? Can you break down the politics of why she did that and why it isn't done more often?
I love it. Yeah. So that's been around for a while. I used to have a publishing deal with Razor and Tie. I'm just remembering, so I'm trying to simplify my answer. There is the phenomenon of the recordings and the publishing are two different copyrights. And if you're a musician, if you've signed a deal, then depending on who you are and how much leverage you have in the band, but for the most part, you may not be the owner of the recording. The label is likely to be the owner of the public. So Taylor's a perfect example. The reason why she did that is she wrote the songs, co-wrote the songs, her publishing, hers for life. She'll get royalties on that, and rightfully so. But the master recordings she was paid in advance up front, essentially, in order for the label to own those indefinitely and with full ownership rights over them, the ability. I'm going to just stop there because there's more complexity to it, which is not worth mentioning. But Taylor Swift did not own her own recordings, and it's Taylor Swift. So if she doesn't own it, it trickles all the way down to the lowliest deal. So to me, and just to tie it up with what I mentioned before, as early as when I was co-writing 10 years ago, I remember, I think that was Foreigner. Foreigner had re-recorded some of their works because they had also been in a bad deal. So they were recording Hot Blooded and all these songs, right?
And that's basically a short circuit to cut out the record label. So the record label owns...
Yeah, the record label has no need to pay them.
That's very specific execution of that song.
Correct.
But like the recipe, if you will, the publishing, they still own, so they can make another version of that cake without paying the kitchen, essentially.
I have nothing further to add. That was a beautiful analogy. I think that was an analogy.
Oh.
I think that that was perfectly fine.
Okay.
They own the recipe, but not the cake. And so Taylor is remaking all of her cakes. And I think that is cool. And that's brilliant. And that's like, yes, power to her to do that. Absolutely.
And so those would be covers? She's covering herself?
Oh, right. To that question. Yeah, I suppose technically it would be... Yeah. Is she covering herself? I suppose so. I mean, technically she needs to maybe sign off on, a cover is a compulsory. So if you cover somebody, they don't need to grant you that permission, but you do need to pay 10 cents to Harry Fox. I'm not really sure.
Actually, that was my next question. So if you want to cover somebody, you don't need their permission. You just need to pay them after the fact. And conversely, if you're a band and somebody really lame wants to cover your music, there's no way to really stop them?
That's correct. It's called a compulsory license. It is the law of the land in America that anyone can, unless it's an unrecorded song, like a song that somebody has written in theory that's published, but there's no recording of it. I think that's which doesn't really happen anymore, really. But if that would be the loophole, like you can't cover a song that the writer themselves or that nobody has ever recorded. You can't be the first to record it without permission. But once it's been recorded once, anyone can do their version of Superstition or, a Taylor Swift, Cruel Summer, right? And you don't need to get permission. You just, and if you upload it to any of the major DSPs, they have things in place where it makes it easy to have that 10 cents skimmed off the top via Harry Fox, who has a monopoly because of some historical accident where they were first, I think, to player pianos.
Wow.
I think that's where their royalty monopoly stream comes from. But yeah, they'll take care of making sure the songwriter gets their 10, 12, whatever it is cents.
So there's a lot of parallels as a photographer with all these issues of IP and copyright and sampling. Like, for instance, I have a good friend, Glennie Friedman's a photographer, and
I know who he is.
He won a lawsuit against the artist Mr. Brainwash for the use of one of his Run DMC images. And Run DMC, Mr. Brainwash essentially appropriated, quote unquote, one of Glenn's photos. And I think ultimately it came down to this assessment of whether the final product was transformative. Was it something, was it a completely unique and new
fair, you're talking about fair use.
Yeah. And in that case, the judge said, no, it's not. And, he had to pay him a bunch of money. But, I'm a big fan of hip hop and, I do love sampling. And there is something to be said about using, the building blocks of music to kind of have this dot approach where you build on it and you take the DNA of things that exist and then you make something completely new or you put it in a new context or whatever. That said, as a producer and as a fan of music, what are some of your favorite samples? Like on a scale of, let's say, like Vanilla Ice to Pete Rock or DJ Premier, what are some of your favorite uses or egregious misuses of samples?
Oh man. I mean, I'd have to have I'm not sure how to answer that simply. I mean, what popped to mind immediately is that group of albums that are as albums, just wonderful pastiches of samples, everything from the Public Enemy. So the newest episode is about
De La Public Enemy.
So De La Soul, 3 Feet High and Rising, Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique, which is still one of my favorite records of all time. But so is De La Soul, but so is also D-Light, World Click, which is kind of a stealth sampledelic. That's the name of their publishing company, ironically, or production company. But I often forget about that when I think about all the sampling records of this era before the laws changed. I always think of Public Enemy and De La Soul and Beastie Boys, but after we did the episode about World Click, I was reminded, oh, damn, this record is also wall-to-wall samples from 1990. And even though it's a different genre, it's not hip hop, it's, I suppose, dance, kind of house pop, but it is so good. And then all the way to like the Avalanches. So I love, and DJ Shadow, I love records that have a lot of kind of a pastiche approach of like collage. I love that. That's a wonderful, that is an art form itself as an album. As an individual sample, I mean, what popped in my head when you said it was the DJ Premier Biggie track. The way that he flipped the Screamin' Jay Hawkins, I Put a Spell on You, which is in 6/8, and he turns it into 4/4, and the chops, it's so gratifying. And it's very simple. It's not like a complicated, like there are some flips where it's like, pitched down and buried and rearranged. Those are beautiful too. And I love those. Whenever I see those come across my feed in the TrackLib, I don't know if you subscribe to their account, TrackLib, which is Tommy Boy's company, by the way, Tommy Silverman's company.
Interesting. No, I'll check that out.
If you don't know this feed, I think you'll love it. Check it out. They do a great job of videos that express with visuals how the sample was transformed and rearranged. I love it when it gets complicated and some other examples, but that one's a little simpler. But yeah, that's what popped in my head. I love how hard that one hits.
Well, one of the things that I think makes One Song Podcast so special is it's not just the way you kind of connect a lot of these dots in music history. And you're obviously a huge fan of music and you have a huge base of knowledge in music, but you're also really experienced just about like the craft of music structure. And I'm not a musician, so sometimes I'll hear you say, like, I picked up this line the other day, you're like, oh, well, he's playing the ride cymbal, but not on the straight eighth. No idea what that means, but or I know you're a big fan of Giorgio Moroder, and you talk about like the pummeling 16th notes.
I do say pummeling 16th notes a lot on the show.
But you said something really interesting in an episode the other day. You're just talking more like about the philosophy behind the purpose of the bridge of a song, and talking about how it's supposed to kind of take the listener to a completely different place. And then you are able to bring them back on that journey, for the final verse or the final chorus or whatever. I guess the point I'm making is that sometimes when you're really knowledgeable about something, it might hinder your ability to really appreciate other aspects of that thing. In other words, like if you are a classically trained French chef, you might kind of lose touch with the simple brilliance of a street kebab or something like that. I mean, I'm wondering, is there any parallels between that and your appreciation of music? I mean, what song really...
That's a great question.
...resonates with you? Does it have to be well crafted, or is it really ultimately about the vibe?
No, I took that a different way. And I'll answer both the version I thought you were asking. I've never heard a song and thought that was poorly anything. Like, to me, the aesthetics of recording and like, what I'm trying to say is, I think there is music I like and music I don't like, for sure. Or music I haven't maybe been turned on to is kind of another way to say it. Like, even the bands that pop in my head where it's like, man, I'll just say it right here. I've never really gotten Pearl Jam or The Killers. There's like a handful of bands where I'm like, it just doesn't really grab me. It's not for me. And that to me, though, is not because I think they're doing anything wrong or that they're doing something I've heard before. Like those aren't disqualifications.
Because their musicianship's not on par or whatever.
None of those are disqualifications. I mean, I love the frickin' Ramones. I love, anything Kathleen Hanna does. Like, it's not about skill that an academy is going to judge, like, at all. Like, I just grew up on punk rock and I grew up on sampling, and I grew up in an era where I also, by the way, I also grew up in the 80s when there was a thread of the Yngwie Malmsteen kind of technical perfection. Yeah. And I do love like frickin' Van Halen. And so I am able to tune into that frequency, but it's not my criteria on whether I like something. But so I don't know if that answers the question. Like, there isn't anything that I would hear and be like, I don't like this because if anything, like, for example, Billie Eilish, when I first heard her, there's a couple tracks on her first record where Phineas does some crazy stuff with distortion. And it's wrong, quote unquote. And who else does this was Sleigh Bells. I don't know if you remember them. I love Sleigh Bells. There's just like the recording was quote unquote incorrect. It was in the red. Yeah. So it was like distorting is a little wrong. But I'm not like, oh, they made a mistake. It's like, that's a cool choice. That's a cool choice to do something that's like distorting in the red and a little bit like not perfect in a cool way. I have a splice pack called Dirty Disco Discoveries, and it stands out on the Splice site where everything is pristine and perfect and clean. And sometimes you want that, but sometimes you want a little character. And with our shared love of hip hop, like that's part of why dusty samples are so appealing, because baked into that sound is some oldness, some incorrectness, some whatever you want to call it. It's not pristine, clean, perfect, modern now. So I love that. I love aesthetics being mixed in that way.
Right, so I guess the long and short, you can still appreciate a street kebab is what I'm saying. The musical street kebab.
Definitely love a street kebab. I'll probably choose it over the French Laundry actually most nights. Yeah.
We always like to end the podcast by asking our guests to plug something that they're not directly involved in, but they feel isn't getting enough attention, whether it's an artist, a book, a movie, a social cause, something, an activity. Is there something you just want to give a little shine to that you want to shout out?
That's a great question. I want to think about it and give you a good answer. I mean, I don't know if this is throwing the format for a loop, but I'm literally obsessed. And I mean to say that like an irritating teenage girl on your FYP, but I'm literally obsessed with skinny dipped almonds, lemon bliss yogurt covered almonds. Like I cannot stop eating them. It is my favorite dessert.
And where do you source such a snack?
I posted that on Instagram and I tagged them in kind of the hopes that they would come to me and say, "Oh, we'll supply," because they're kind of expensive.
Yeah.
I was hoping that I might get a sponsorship, but they liked it and they said thanks, and then that was
so
it.
like a pallet did not show up at your house?
No. So I get nothing out of this, and they're freaking expensive. I'm just looking right now. It's like $18 for a 1 pound bag.
Wow.
But they last me a week.
Okay.
And it is my snack of the week.
Salted?
But the reason why I love them.
Salted and sweet kind of, or no?
No. Here's the deal. It's almonds with a thin layer of yogurt coating. Because like if you think about it, it's not a new thing to put yogurt covered, some flavor on almonds. Grandmas, that's a grandma thing, if anything.
Yeah.
Those almonds with like the overly bright, it's an old Easter thing. But it's a thin layer.
It's a new take.
So it's not too much. It's not too sweet. You will not exceed your 30-gram limit if you are a psychopath like I am about sugar with the skinny dipped almonds.
Okay.
Again, not only do I not get anything from saying that, they rejected the opportunity to send the pallet to my door. So fuck them.
All right. So maybe
anyway.
For all the listeners, try it once and once only.
You just try it once and never buy it again.
Luxury, thanks so much for sitting down, man. This has been really cool. You are like an endless well of music information. And like I said, One Song it's a fantastic podcast. So for those of you listening, right after you finish listening to the entire archive of this podcast, The Plug, go on over, check out One Song with Luxury and Diallo Riddle, and you won't be disappointed. It's really interesting.
That's right.
Luxury, hopefully our paths will cross in person sometime soon, man.
Thanks for having me on the show, Justin. It was nice to meet you. And yeah, hopefully I know that you're not in LA, so next time you're out here, give me a shout. We will shoplift some skinny dipped almonds. How about that? And we will enjoy them together.
All right, it's a date.
All right, man. Cheers. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Thank you. Thanks for listening, and a huge thanks to today's guest for dropping in. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and take a minute to rate, review, follow, or subscribe. This episode of The Plug contains original theme music by Andrew Van Weingarten and Dan Drohan. Mixing and sound design by Matt Boynton at Ultraviolet Audio, logo and branding by Italic at italic-studio.com, and you can check out my photography at justinj.com. Thanks again, and be sure to check out the archive and tune in for future conversations.